going to ask you to work overtime, you're going to have to play 36.
I have to. To get it in between the rain.
Yeah. All right. So we're going to pick the story back up. In the not so distant past, just because there's one among us that doesn't like in review or recap, so I don't know if y'all have noticed, but I've come up with all kinds of different little ways to summarize.
A rose by any other name, still a rose. Still smells sweet.
Thank you.
Moses has met God. Moses has gone up the mountain. He's seen the burning bush. And God has told him, go. And so Moses is protesting, right? He's not carrying a sign, right? And that kind of protesting. But he's basically telling God, who, me? Who am I? Right? That kind of thing. I'm a nobody. And finally he says, how can I represent you? I don't even know your name. They're going to ask me, right? Who sent you? What God sent you? Because remember, the children of Israel have now been 400 years. What, you don't have youngins there in the back?
No, they're doing stuff right now.
Oh, they're okay. Well, at least look like you're happy to be in here.
I'm tired. I got a headache. Got a migraine. Sorry.
I had a head like that, mine and hurt too.
All right, I'm going to have to change my lesson. Dearly beloved, we're gathered here today to pay our last respects.
She knows I love her.
Oh my goodness gracious. Okay. So Moses has been protesting. How can I represent you? I don't even know your name. And God tells him, I am with you. Right? We talked a little bit about this. God makes up the difference. Right? And he says, my name is Yahweh, or I am that I am. Right? I cause to be what I cause to be. So in conceptual terms, what he's basically saying is, I am creator by my own will. Okay? Now, when we create something, right, and as human beings, we create art, we created a car, airplanes, right? We create these things. How do we do it? Well, we have to dig in the earth, we have to mine the raw materials, and then we have to put our hands to it, right? So it's not by sheer force of will. There is will involved, but it's by a manual means, right? We actually have to sweat to do this. God says, by my will I create. I simply speak, right? There's an old joke about a team of scientists who come to heaven and they have a seed. And they say, we don't need God. God, we don't need you anymore because we have made a seed. We can grow our own food. We have made this seed ourselves, right? And God said, oh, that's really cool. He said, what, he asked them all kinds of questions about it. He said, well, let's see how it works. And they said, we thought you'd ask. Here's a bucket of dirt. And God said, whoa. He said, you go make your own dirt, right? He said, you can't use my dirt. And that's the point. No matter how ingenious we are, right? We are only building on what God has already created by sheer force of will, okay? And so he also uses the name Yahweh. We talked about this at some length last week. Yahweh was a name that had been forgotten by the children of Israel. It was used a lot during Abraham and Isaac and even during the early days of Jacob. But as we get down through the story of Joseph, and you'll see that if you're reading in your King James Version, you'll see Yahweh translated as the Lord. Okay? I am the Lord, right? So in the Hebrew, he would have been saying, I am Yahweh. That's what he would have told Abraham. That's what, sir?
I am that I am.
I am that I am. And so, but as we get down through Joseph, right, and the and the 7 years of famine and the 7 years of plenty, the people aren't using this name. And then they go into Egypt. Now, keep in mind that in Egypt they are surrounded, immersed, if you will, in this other culture, this polytheism, right? Many gods. They got a god of the Nile and a god of the underworld and a god of the sun, and they got all these different things. And so while they would have retained this memory and even be devout to a point in following the instruction of Abraham handed down through all those generations, they were no longer calling on the name of God. Now, we do have scripture that says they were calling on God, God save us, God help us, but not by name, right? And so God is reminding them or he's telling Moses to remind them that I'm the God of Abraham. You used to know my name. You used to call my name regularly as a people, okay? And so that's where we go. So let's pick up our story. So we'll be in Exodus chapter 3, verses 18 through 22. Keep in mind, I'm going to read from the New Living Translation. I may refer back to the King James Version occasionally, but the New Living Translation. And so we pick up our story, verse 18, chapter 3. The elders, God is speaking. And so we stopped mid-comment last week. So God's still speaking. He's telling Moses, the elders of Israel will accept your message. Then you and the elders must go to the king of Egypt and tell him, the Lord. Now remember that's Yahweh translated. The God of the Hebrews has met with us. So please let us take a 3-day journey into the wilderness to offer sacrifices to the Lord our God. But I know, God continues speaking, but I know that the king of Egypt will not let you go unless a mighty hand forces him. So I will raise my hand and strike the Egyptians, performing all kinds of miracles among them. And then at last, he will let you go. None of what is coming was a surprise to Moses. God has told him beforehand that it's coming. As we continue the narrative here, verse 21, and I will cause the Egyptians to look favorably on you. They will give you gifts when you go, so you will not leave empty-handed. Every Israelite woman will ask for articles of silver and gold and fine clothing from her Egyptian neighbors and from the foreign women in their houses. You will dress your sons and daughters with these, stripping the Egyptians of their wealth. Okay? All right. So God now is telling Moses that the children of Israel will believe him. Okay? They will believe you. But the Egyptians are going to take some convincing. That's what he's telling them. I'm going to have to raise my hand. Right? And so God warns Moses he's going to have to hit Egypt hard, but they are to ask for a national vacation to journey 3 days into the wilderness to worship God. Right? Tell him that God has visited you and you've got to go 3 days into the wilderness to worship God. Now that might seem kind of odd, right? Because God has told Moses, I'm fixing to deliver you from bondage. But tell Pharaoh you're going 3 days. So this takes a little bit of study here. The term that's rendered here as a 3-day journey does not mean 3 days of travel. Okay? That is not what they're talking about. I know it translates out as a 3-day journey, but it doesn't mean that we're only going to go 3 days. Okay? So in this culture, in this time, a demand would not be made immediately of a king or a parent. So you wouldn't just go up and say to a king, "Turn me loose, we're walking out of here." Okay? That would be seen as a challenge. And so proper culture, now, you say, well, God could say that, right? Because he's God after all. But remember, who is God's spokesperson? Moses. So there's going to be a human talking to a human. And so the rules of etiquette will be observed. And so they wouldn't come in and make that demand overtly. They would couch it in basically they talk it down. They couch it in some language, right? So they wouldn't say, "Hey, we're just walking out of here. We're done with you. So we're just going to go for a 3-day journey." Now, if we were in the South, if Moses was from Alabama, right? He might have said, "Well, hey, God came and visited with us, and he wants us to go a ways out into the desert to worship him." Go a ways, right? Yeah. We're just going to go a little ways, right? Now, have you ever told somebody, they say, "Hey," you say, "Hey, come with me, I want to take you someplace." And they say, "Where is it?" You say, "Well, it's just a ways down the road." And then you start driving. You start driving and they go, "How far did you say this way?" "Well, it's a little ways." So there's a ways, and then there's a little ways, and then there's over yonder, and then there's a fur piece. And it's not something your wife wears around her neck, right? That means we're going to be on the road a while, right? So 3 days, even though it sounds to our ears as a very specific time, was a non-specific phrase, okay? He said, we got to go a little ways out into the desert. We got to separate ourselves from you to worship. Now, the whole country is going. Now, and as we read on and we see Pharaoh's reactions to all of this, right? Pharaoh knows exactly what's being asked of him. Right? He's like, no. As a matter of fact, if you remember what the Pharaoh before was afraid of when Moses was born, you remember that? When Moses was born, what was he afraid of? These people got so large, and if they ever ally with some of our enemies, we'll be defeated from within. All right, so there's all that fear is still there. These people are going to walk out of here en masse, ally with one of our enemies, and they're going to be right here, and they know everything about us. So that fear is also still going to be in play. And but today, like I said, Moses would have said, "We want to go a ways." The distance is nondescript, and that's the point. Okay? It's really a request to leave. It's really a request to leave permanently. How many of y'all, since we're mostly, you already raising your hand, brother. Huh? Oh, yeah, just out into the desert. Yeah, we're just going, you're going a ways out there. Okay? But how many of y'all raising children would come and ask you, "Hey, can we do such and such?" And you didn't want to say no, right? So what would you say instead? Ha! There it is. No. Let me think about it. Let me think about it, right? What? My daughter, my oldest girl, she finally got old enough and smart enough to figure that out. She called me on it one day, and she said, "That just means no." And I said, "You're right. Now, quit asking me about it." Didn't quite go the way she planned.
Go ask your mama.
Now that phrase right there means I don't care if we do or not, but I'm not going to be held responsible. Go ask your mama. Let's see what she tells you, right? Let her be the bad guy, all right? So it's a nondescript, and that's the point, right? And that's why Pharaoh gets so upset. He knows exactly what is being asked, even though it's a very non-threatening request, right? And that was the whole thing. But God is saying that you're going to be polite. You're going to follow the culture of the day. You're not going to demand this king to be turned loose. Okay.
Real quick,
Yes, sir.
I think part of it we have to remember also is that Moses was brought up in the palace, maybe not underneath the king or the pharaoh that he's going to now. So he would have learned all of
Those types of diplomatic. That's correct. He would understand how to talk to power.
Yeah.
He
And
had the right type of etiquette.
yeah.
Right.
And Pharaoh didn't believe himself to be human. Pharaoh believed himself to be God, or at least appointed or created by God. And that's where they thought their power came from, is that they were chosen by a God, their God.
So I agree with you partially.
So from, talking from a human to a God is what the Pharaoh would have looked at it as.
I agree with you partially in that the pharaohs would have considered that their power came from God, that they were specially chosen, right? I do not think that anyone who rises to that level of power is so deluded that they do not know the truth. That is,
Come on, think about it.
no, wait a minute.
We've had some
They-
leaders in the world that believed they were pretty
Right. But they know that when they look at, now they may never admit it, right? And it is essential that they force everyone else to believe that I am godlike.
Yeah.
But they know when they look in the mirror and they cut themselves shaving that they are not. I mean, it's right. So at some level they know. Right? So now, but I'll grant you that Pharaoh will act like that because he has to, because that was one way, especially in the ancient world, that was one way that they protected themselves from assassination. Oh no, you walk in the room to kill me and I'm gonna know immediately, right? And scare people to death, okay?
Well, maybe not thinking of themselves as a god, but as some kind of deity, some form of deity.
Okay.
Because they consider themselves higher than anybody else.
Granted. Now, in the next few verses, he says, I'm going to cause the Egyptians to look favorably on you. And he uses this term, look favorably upon you. Okay? So while Moses is trying not to create an international incident in his first conversation with Pharaoh, right? God is going to put it into the hearts of the everyday person to consider the Egyptians with great favor, right? With great respect. Now, I want you to remember that it wasn't but 40 years ago. It wasn't but 80 years ago that the respect or the way the common Egyptian viewed the Hebrew living in their midst was of such low esteem that Pharaoh believed he could count on them to snatch babies from mothers' arms on the street and pitch them into the river. Yeah, 80 years. Oh. He's from Alabama. He don't know what all them fingers are for. It's like 2, 4, 8. Oh, never mind. Okay. So he says, look favorably. The last time we saw this being used was involving Joseph. When Joseph rose to prominence in Potiphar's house and in the prison where he served, he had the favor of God upon him. God is going to extend that favor. So they are going. How many of y'all, just as a quick question, I want you to think back. If you've never done this, this would be a really good exercise. Think back over your life and pick out moments in your life where you received something, either a good performance report, a raise, a job. Somebody just gave you something out of the blue or from what you consider to be completely. Brother Milton here, he's just like, I don't think anybody's ever given me nothing. I'm sorry, brother, you're sitting right in front of me. I got to pick on you. But this is because God has put put for you favor on someone else's heart. In other words, they've looked at you and they just said, I want to give you something. I want to do something. What do we even say, right, when we ask for a special consideration from someone? How do we ask? Hey, no. Hey, would you do me a favor? Right? Would you do me a favor? Right? And if we're being really sarcastic, then we look at somebody and go, I'm going to do you a favor and not help you, right? But, do what?
That is a favor.
In some cases, please, don't help me. I've got this. So God is going to put favor on the Hebrew people so that when they ask, the Egyptians are just going to hand over their stuff. Right? Just going to hand it over. Now remember, we talked a little bit about this. Remember when we were talking about Joseph and how Joseph brought all of that wealth into Egypt some 400 years ago? Remember we talked about that with the famine? And he bought up land. They said, we got no money left. He said, well, bring me your land. And they handed over the titles of their farms. And they said, we got nothing left. He said, then bring me yourselves. And so Egypt became an incredibly wealthy nation, okay? And so we talked about that great wealth. So this was an investment by God some 400 years ago in Israel's future. It was a tomorrow fund. Y'all know what a tomorrow fund is? Tomorrow fund is the name of a special investment that you can lay out for your children to go to college, right? You can't touch it for anything except school until they're 26 years old. Then I think they can pull it out and do whatever they want to with it.
So college fund?
It's like a college fund, yeah. So it's a special investment though, and there's some tax breaks and there's some things you can do. It's called a tomorrow fund, right? Or at least it used to be called a tomorrow fund. Maybe they don't call it that anymore. Maybe it's a yesterday fund. I don't know. But this was God's tomorrow fund. Okay? He invested it in the Bank of Egypt, where it's been sitting for 400 years earning interest. Well, now payment is coming due. Okay? And remember, I told you at the time when we were studying Joseph, I said, God isn't reacting the way we do, right? How do we typically do things? The right here, the right now. You move, I move. Counter move. If somebody's really, really smart, they may be thinking 2 or 3 or 4 moves ahead, right? That's why if you play chess with somebody who can think 3 or 4 or 5 moves ahead, you just get wiped out all the time, right? There's only one way to beat somebody who plays chess like that. Start jumping the men and start playing checkers. They don't ever expect that. Okay, I'm teasing. So God is thinking 400 years into the future. 500, 600, 1,000 years into the future. God is already making plans for what's happening in the distant future that we can't imagine. And God's setting pieces up now. Sometimes, I say this all the time, right? We have a tendency as human beings to whenever things get really rough on us, right, to cast our eyes heavenward and go, why me? Right? Right? And we've talked about sometimes the answer is, why not you? Sometimes the answer is, who says it's got anything to do with you? Yeah. Sometimes the answer is because I'm setting the stage for a blessing for you 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years in the future. Right? How many of us have had a little boyfriend, a little girlfriend? Think back, this is way back in the time when you was in high school or junior high school. Did they have high school? Junior high school?
Yeah, they had junior high.
No?
I refuse to answer that on ground. We all went to the same school.
All went to the same school. All the grades was in one room. Okay. I can. No, we won't go there. Never mind. But you had a little boyfriend, a little girlfriend. You thought the sun set, the moon rose. You thought this was the one, and they broke your heart. Everybody in here has had a broken heart. Some of us more recently than others, but still, what are you looking at me for? But we've had a broken heart, right? And you go, why? And for some of us, we look at, if that hadn't happened, I'd have ended up married to that person. And I see how they've I see how they've turned out and what God saved me from, right? And so sometimes the heartbreak is because God is setting the stage for our next blessing, right? We're learning and God is positioning the pieces on the board, okay? And so that's what we see here. It's been earning interest for 400 years. And God said, now it's time. If you ask, if you go to your neighbor, now, I'm going to tell you how much this happened, okay? All you ladies that are married, you probably have a wedding ring, right? No?
No.
Who are you pointing at? Is somebody sleeping in my... Oh, okay. So, or diamond engagement ring, okay? And so, if this were that time, and your Hebrew neighbor had come over and said, hey, I'd like to borrow your wedding ring and your diamond engagement ring. Right? That's the reaction you would expect. Except now, because of what God is putting on their hearts, they're like, oh, sure, you need to borrow my rings? Here, take them. Right? You know, for you guys, right, just think about whatever your favorite hunting rifle is. Or bow. Or bow, right? And your next door neighbor comes over and says, hey, neighbor, I'd like to borrow that rifle. You know, that...
No.
Not just borrow it, but
No.
No, I need to buy. Sure, here, take it, right? Because this is the favor, right? Let me borrow your lawnmower there, bud. Oh, sure, here, take it, right? And so that God was going to give them that kind of favor. Whatever they asked for was going to be given to them, and they were to ask for it. They were to ask for it until their wives were dressed, until their sons and daughters were dressed, until they had everything they could carry to take out of Egypt, okay? So that's what he's saying. So it's unparalleled in history, right? Without firing a shot, they took the wealth of Egypt out of the country with them. All right.
Quick question.
Yes, sir.
On that, did any of that make it to the Promised Land as part of the temple?
Much of it, much of it did. The only thing, huh?
Are you sure you're not in high school?
I know, right? Much of it did. The gold that didn't make it was what they had to drink. The golden calf. There you go. Very good. You can tell she's married to a preacher. She knew exactly where he was going. Because remember, what did God do? What did Moses do? He broke it up. He ground it up. He spread that gold dust on the water and made them drink it for what they had, the offense they had committed to God. Okay, so
I mean, for them to travel, I could also see it as God preparing them for 40 years of travel through the desert of having to buy, which they still complain and whatever, that they had this much wealth, that they didn't use it to buy food and necessities in those 40 years.
So remember. So you're thinking like a man thinks.
And that's fine.
A mankind. I mean, a human being. Because women think the same way. I'm not dissing you, bro.
Quail and manna.
Men are speaking.
Quail and manna.
Well,
So as they traveled through the wilderness, they had not only their own animals, which were multiplying, so they had the sheep and the cows and all that, But they had manna that showed up every morning except on the Sabbath day. Okay?
Which they were told
Right?
to only double on the.
But they could only pick up for 2 days on Friday night. Right? If they picked up 2 days worth any other night, it went bad overnight. But on Friday night, none of it ever went bad. And if they went out on Saturday morning, there wasn't none out there to get. Okay? And then when they complained about it, manna, manna, manna. That's all we ever get to eat is manna, manna, manna. Right? God said, okay, you got to turn your nose up at the manna, and here come quail. They ate quail till literally, Scripture says it came out their nose.
Yeah.
Right? Because they stuffed themselves and made gluttons out of themselves.
Also, were provided shoes that never wore out.
Shoes that never wore out, which by inference says their clothes never.
Which is expensive.
Yeah, their clothes never wore out. Now, I don't think that the shoes grew with them. I think they had to make new shoes for the kids, but
They just didn't wear out. They passed it on to the next generation.
yeah, the next group of kids, they could wear those shoes, sir.
But during the Exodus, don't you think that along with the precious metals that they took out with them, they also took grain?
They might have. Scripture does not say, but they might have taken grain. We know they took clothes.
Yeah.
Okay, so it wasn't just the precious metals. We tend to focus on that, but it was good fabric, silks, and fabrics that they took. It says they took anything they asked for.
Yeah.
So, I was about half kidding when I said your lawnmower, your favorite hunting rifle, your favorite bow, right?
They would certainly have had everything that they needed to celebrate the Passover every year.
Yes.
They would have had all that they needed. The bitter herbs, they would have had the unleavened bread, which would come from grain. So I would say that Brother Eric is correct in saying they probably took everything except for the Egyptian kitchen sinks
Right.
with them.
And they may have taken that because there were some folk with wagons.
Uh-huh.
So they carted off a bunch.
They walked out, for that period of time, they walked out of Egypt being one of the richest nations who was not yet a nation at that moment. Because of all of the plunder, and not from war, but plunder that they took from the Egyptians, which the Egyptians gave willingly, as the scripture says.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So,
I mean, even Charlton Heston's version of the Ten Commandments, Pharaoh said, give them anything they need to get them out of Egypt. Whatever
That's
they
right.
want.
so they were asking for anything, everything.
Yeah.
Hey, it's kind of like if you knew, if your spouse came home and said, pack the car, baby, we are going on a trip to the promised land. We don't know how long we're going to be on the road, but we're going to be on the road. We are never coming back here. And so mama's going to be like, well, how do I pack that much stuff, right? I need extra suitcases. Go to the neighbor and ask him. Well, I'm going to need an extra, right? Go to the neighbor and ask him. And so that's what they were doing.
Well, knowing my wife, I'd have to borrow somebody's F-350 because I wouldn't have enough room in the car I currently got.
Then your neighbor, you got a neighbor that would give it to you.
More than likely.
And then you go, this truck ain't big enough. I need a trailer. Go ask for it. That's what I'm saying. They left with wagons, horses, whatever they needed. they left with, okay? All right, so now breaking into chapter 4, we'll start with verse 1. Sometimes we just can't learn our lesson. But Moses protested again. What if they won't believe me or listen to me? What if they say, the Lord never appeared to you? Then the Lord asked him, what is that in your hand? I just love God's way of conversing here with Moses, right? I can just, in my mind's eye, I can see God, right? And he's sitting there in the bush, and Moses is coming up with every excuse in the book. And so God's looking at him, and Moses says, what if they don't believe me? Right?
We
What-
do that today when
Oh,
it
yeah.
comes to spreading the gospel of Jesus Christ.
What if they don't believe me? What if they say the Lord never appeared to you? Right? And so God doesn't say, look, I done told you twice. All right? I told you I was going to be with you. I told you what was going to happen. Quit asking me. No. What does he do? He sits back and he goes, what you got there in your hand? Right? That is a completely disarming response. Right? Moses, I'm trying to convince you, right? If I was to show you my true self, you'd drop dead. So I'm gonna, what's that you got in your hand? Right? Diverts Moses' attention. Okay. What's that in your hand? A shepherd's staff, Moses replied. Throw it down on the ground. Right? And the Lord told him. So Moses threw down the staff and it turned into a snake. And Brother Alton jumped back and said, pow, 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 pow. So,
You better know it.
so Moses
You got that right.
Moses threw down the staff. It turned into a snake. Moses jumped back. King James says he fled away. Right? So, it stopped short of saying he screamed like a little girl. Although I can't say that. I can't say that about my esteemed brother over here. Went to a one-room school, but Moses
Don't knock the one-room school.
Moses threw down the staff. It turned into a snake. Moses jumped back. And then the Lord told him, reach out and grab its tail. So Moses reached out and grabbed it, and it turned back into a shepherd's staff in his hand. This is how we know that Brother Alton. Let me tell you something. If you're ever in prison somewhere and Brother Alton's got to come deliver you with a staff that turns into a snake, you're going to rot in prison.
Amen, brother, to that.
Okay. Oh, my goodness. So reach out, grab it by the tail. Moses reached out. Now, what this suggests is that it wasn't the snake so much that startled Moses as it was the sudden appearance of a snake from something he'd been carrying in his hand all this time that he knew was a stick. Okay? So, but I want you to remember this moment because we're going to come back to it here in a couple of slides. Verse 5.
Finish that one.
Huh? Didn't I?
I don't think.
Yeah, I said Moses reached out and grabbed it, turned back into a shepherd's staff. He's
They
still
were
all
still
wound.
on the snake
He's
part.
still all on the snake. He's like, oh my God, the snake! The snake! Okay.
I'm glad you didn't have one on the screen because
Oh my goodness gracious. You would have had a cow if you'd been with us here a month or two ago when AJ caught them snakes for the girls.
I wouldn't have been around.
All right, perform this sign, the Lord told him. Then they will believe that the Lord, remember the Lord, that Yahweh, the God of their ancestors, the God of Abraham, Jacob, Isaac, and the God of Jacob, really has appeared to you. Then the Lord said to Moses, now, put your hand inside your cloak. So Moses put his hand inside his cloak. That's going to freak me out if this, because I'm doing it for an example. So Moses put his hand inside a cloak, and when he took it out again, his hand was white as snow with a severe skin disease. Now, King James calls it leprosy, just if you're reading along. There were a myriad of skin diseases that were classified under the umbrella of leprosy. It was incurable. They were all incurable. So that's why you'll see the difference here. But it was leprosy or something akin to. Now put your hand back in your cloak, the Lord said. So Moses put his hand back in. When he took it out again, it was as healthy as the rest of his body. The Lord said to Moses, if they do not believe you and are not convinced by the first miraculous sign, the snake, they will be convinced by the second sign. Okay? All right, so basically, make sure I'm in the right place here. Yeah. Basically, what God is doing is He's giving Moses a business card. Right? Have you ever, anybody in here ever used a business card?
Yeah.
Yeah, right? So when you walk up on somebody and you say, hey, I'm so-and-so, I represent such and such a company, what do? You hand them the card, right? It is your bona fides, right? It says, I'm telling you the truth, right? Here's proof that I am who I say I am. I represent who I say I represent. But it's also a way of introduction. I've given you something, right? And so it introduces me to you. It establishes a connection between us. And so God is giving Moses a calling card. He says, if they don't believe you, verse 9, or listen to you, even after these two signs, so this is the third sign, take some water from the Nile River, pour it out on the dry ground, and when you do, the water from the Nile will turn to blood on the ground. Oh. Right? Not going back into the river. He said, pour it out on the ground. It'd be blood when it hits the ground. Okay, here we go. Pop quiz. Y'all didn't know there's going to be a pop quiz, did you? Now y'all sitting there wishing you'd paid attention when I was talking instead of laughing so much at Brother Alton and the snake. Well, who are these signs for? And I'll cut you some slack. Is it for Pharaoh or for the children of Israel?
Which one? Because the
all three of them. God said, I'm going to give you these three signs. Who are they for? They're for the elders of Israel. Exactly. They're for the children of Israel. Why? Why did God give Moses three signs to show the children of Israel? Don't overthink it.
So they can make sure that they follow him.
Prove He is God, right? No. All He's doing, He gave Moses these three signs because Moses is still complaining. They won't believe me. They won't believe me. They won't believe me. And so God is trying to reassure Moses. Okay, Moses, they won't believe you. I'm going to give you three signs to prove you are who. I'll give you this nice shiny business card. When you show them this, they will be amazed. Okay? It's for Moses. God is going out of His way to reassure a reluctant servant. Oh, the grace of God. The grace of God. Now, we are definitely no better than Moses. I would say we're not even close to Moses, right? That in our own reluctance. But God is going out of His way.
If I'm not mistaken, Jesus kind of made reference to this in the Gospels, where He said, a vile and corrupt generation demands a sign. Right? Moses wouldn't believe unless God gave him a sign. He's trying to teach Moses a lesson. The children of Israel, the elders of Israel during Jesus' day wanted a sign. And Jesus told them what? He said, I'll give you a sign. It's the same sign that God gave Moses to give to the children of Israel. Lift up the serpent on the staff, that if I be lifted up, that's the only sign that you need.
Right. God's signs, this is what is amazing. God's signs come in threes.
Yep.
So He gave Moses three signs. Right? What did Jesus say? They said they wanted a sign for Jesus. Jesus said, you're going to get a sign of three. As Jonah was in the belly of the whale for 3 days,
so shall the Son of Man.
So shall the Son of Man be in the earth for 3 days. Threes. Okay? This was the beginning. Remember I told you God is thinking hundreds of years ahead, right? And so God gives Moses three signs. He gives Moses three signs so that he feels comfortable when he shows up, they're going to believe me. Right? So quit complaining, Moses. He gives him snake, leprosy, water and blood on the ground. But notice, Moses is still complaining. Moses is still complaining. He really doesn't want to go. He's really insecure. He doesn't want to make this trip. So let's pick up verse 10. Moses pleaded with the Lord, "Oh Lord, I'm not very good with words. I never have been. I'm not now, even though you've spoken to me. I get tongue-tied. My words get tangled. And then the Lord asked Moses. Now, it's important, I think, to read all of this. Remember, okay, so let me back up. Y'all remember the significance of when God called to Moses? Right? He said, Moses, Moses, twice. Y'all remember we talked about that. In that culture, the repetition of the name, right? God certainly didn't need to repeat anything, right? If he had said, Travis, right? That's all he needs to say. Travis would be like, oh, I'm out. Okay? Milton, oh, look out. Okay, I'm done. Right? But he called it twice. The significance of that was that is the way a father might speak to a sleeping child. Right? You ever woke a child up from sleep? You call their name gently, and you call it twice.
Yeah. Did it this afternoon with Maven. Maven, right? Oh, look, it's Pappy, right? Up she comes, right? So God was ran straight to Nina.
It's the best of both worlds.
Yeah.
So we're having a parade. Hey man, how's it going? So God is waking Moses up, and God is speaking to Moses gently, the way a father, a human father, might speak to a child. Hey, I want you to go do something for me. I'm not sure I can, right? You small children, they got real confidence issues, right? They hadn't learned yet. And so, no, come on. I remember the rabbit trail.
All right.
Rabbit trail. I remember being in the Cub Scouts. Now this was back when they hadn't invented Boy Scouts yet. All you had was Cub Scouts. No. So one of the things I had to do to earn a badge was to climb 12 feet up a tree or rope. Now we didn't have no rope that went for 12 feet. Didn't have nothing to hang it from. So I elected to climb a tree. We had a big old maple tree. For me, it was at least 75 feet tall. I would go back and look at it later, and it was lucky it topped out at 35 feet. But, I mean, it was huge for an 8-year-old. So my dad took me outside and said, "Here, this is a good tree for you to climb in," because it had a low branch, right? So I could step up into it and start climbing it up. So I start up this tree, right? And the first branch, the crotch, the first one there was about 4.5 or 5 feet off the ground. I got up into that, and I got a hold of this tree like I'm in a hurricane, right? And I'm eye level with my daddy. And I'm like, "Is this high enough?" It's like, no, son, you're going to have to go higher. And he had to coax me because I was ready to turn back at every handhold. I'd go up one more branch. Okay, this has got to be enough. This has got to be enough. No, son, you got to go higher, right? And I go a little higher. No. And I finally got up, and he finally said, "Okay." He said, "That's high enough. I'll sign off on your accomplishment." Man, I came down that tree lickety-split. Was not an hour. It was not an hour. I was like, "Hey, Dad, can I go climb that tree again?" Before the summer was over, I was up in the top of that tree, 35 feet or so off the ground, where the branches would do this in the wind with my weight, right? Oh, yeah! Right? And my dad just stand down on the ground, look at me and go, "What do you mean? What are you doing?" Okay? But I had to be coaxed because I had no confidence, right? I was scared. This is where Moses is at. So I want you to take that imagery, right? That's how God is speaking to Moses. Now Moses finally says, "I get tongue-tied." God's not upset. He says, "Who makes a person's mouth?" Right? He's not speaking in anger yet. Who makes a person's mouth? Who decides whether people speak or do not speak? Hear or do not hear? See or do not see? Is it not I, the Lord, Yahweh? Now go. I will be with you as you speak. I will instruct you in what to say. But Moses again pleaded, "Lord, please send someone else." Okay? Now, some theologians, and I played with this, a couple of slides or a couple of weeks ago. Some theologians have suggested that this meant Moses had a stutter.
What?
He couldn't speak well. That he had a stutter, okay? Now, they may have been right. They may have been right, but perhaps it's something else, right? So, if we look at this, perhaps Moses simply would confuse his words. Like, he's afraid he's going to get in front of Pharaoh and he's going to throw his staff down and say something like, "Behold, my staff becomes a snake," right? It could be something like that, right? He just gets so anxious that the wrong word comes out. Anybody here ever have that problem?
Oh, yeah.
That's right. And if you're around some of us who speak for a living, right, we are never going to let you hear the end of it. Never going to let you hear the end of it. Okay. So, okay. Or maybe he would just get so excited, he would want to say, "Behold the power of the Lord," and he's afraid it's going to come out a moldy hour of swords. Right? We don't know. But here's what I think. We don't know for sure what Moses' problem was, but we know that God is beginning to get impatient. Okay? And we'll see that in the next verse. Now, the first couple of times that Moses complained, right, it can be easily understood as a show of humility. And this was common, right? Whenever one was speaking to power, right, one would immediately not debase, but lower oneself, right? I don't want to take too much on. Abraham, when he stood before God, he said, "Behold, I've taken to speak to the Lord, and I am but dust and ashes," right? So I'm going to be, there's a word for it, and I can't remember now right off the top of my head what it is, but the first couple of times that Moses did this, it could have been he's just making sure God knows, "Hey, look, I'm being humble." And humility is a good thing. One thing that we as a human race are lacking in is humility. Even when we think we finally arrived, I am now a humble person, right? We just went to bragging on our humility, and guess what? Yeah, that wiped it out. Okay. So we see that God asked Moses, who creates the human mouth, who determines whether the senses work. And then he tells Moses, I get tickled at this, right? He says, "Who makes you speak or not speak? Who determines who sees or not sees?" It's me, by the way. Right? God tells Moses, "It's me," in case you weren't sure. Right? Because Moses has been complaining. And so is Moses serious here about a speech impediment? I ask the question because as we move forward through the rest of Moses' life, we will see no evidence or reluctance on Moses' part to speak. He speaks to the nation of Israel. He speaks to Pharaoh. He writes the first 5 books of the Bible. Is this he comes down from the mountain and passes judgment on those worshiping the golden idol. Right? This is not a man who has trouble speaking. Okay?
Insecurity.
Say what?
Insecurity.
Insecurity. It could be insecurity. He also does not seem to have any issues wielding the power of God. I mean, he, as a matter of fact, right, and we'll see when we get into the study of Exodus a little further, right, God says, "Speak to the rock." Moses said, "Must I strike the rock again?" Right, and it got Moses in trouble, right? So Moses didn't have any trouble then like he's having now. So is this humility run amok, right? Some people think so. So it was polite, or it was considered proper behavior to debase oneself or to lower oneself in the face of power. Higher the power, the more one would protest one's worthiness. So if you were talking to me, you might go, I'm not really that good. If you were talking to the king, you might go, I'm an absolutely worthless scoundrel, right? Bigger powers that much higher than you, you go for broke. You head for the dirt. Okay? But until the final protest. Now, the one where he says, surely there must be someone else you can send, right? He's basically saying, I don't want to do this. You must know someone else who will go. Now, for whatever reason, known only to God, right? I mean, we can look and we can guess, oh, Moses had the right kind of faith. Moses had the right kind of character, etc., etc., etc. But it was God who looked at him and found him to be the right man for the job at the time, right? He said, you're the man. And Moses went, nope, not me. Nope, surely you must know somebody else. You have made a mistake. You are mistaken, right? Until now, Moses has been saying, but who am I? I'm a nobody. They'll never believe me. I can't speak well, right? All at least superficially legitimate. Then it finally says, you're just going to have to pick somebody else, right? Basically what he's saying is, God, you made a mistake. You remember what happened when Job said, God, you made a mistake? God showed up in a whirlwind, in a tornado, and said, okay, buddy, stand up here. Let's have this out, me and you. Which even that, right? What an amazing thing. Job falls flat on his face, and God stands him on his feet and says, no. Stand up. Face me like a man. Let us reason this out. Let's have this conversation. God is not afraid of difficult conversations. We're afraid of difficult conversations because we know we ain't right to begin with. I've heard it said that the reason we struggle with some decisions is because we know what the right thing to do is. We just don't want to do it. Okay? So, the final protest is, surely you must know someone else who can do this. This polite but outright attempt to refuse the assignment is finally what makes God angry. Right? Moses' protests of humility have become a stubborn refusal to answer the call. So looking now at verse 14, then the Lord became angry with Moses. All right, he said. Now, I want you to think about this. God has become angry. If you're God, or if I'm God, and I have become angry, what happens? Lightning bolts begin to fly. Ha ha! Zap! God says, God becomes angry with Moses. All right, he said. What about your brother, Aaron the Levite? I know he speaks well. And look, he's on the way to meet you now. He will be delighted to see you. Talk to him. Put the words in his mouth. I will be with both of you as you speak, and I will instruct you both in what to do. Aaron will be your spokesman to the people. He will be your mouthpiece, and you will stand in the place of God for him, telling him what to say. And take your shepherd's staff with you and use it to perform the miraculous signs I have shown you. Now, God is angry. And yet, even in his anger, God displays the character that has given us salvation. He could have struck Moses down. He could have said, that's it, I've had it with you, zap! You are now the burning Moses. Aaron will be here in a couple of days, and I will use Aaron. Okay? But he doesn't do that, does he? He doesn't do that. Even in his anger, he gave Moses yet another tool to use. Okay? Angry at our sin, our refusal to step out in obedience, and yet at the same time, he's extending grace. He didn't break Moses. He just loved him. Okay? I made him mad. It says God was angry. But even in his anger, he gave Moses a companion. Okay? I'll send your older brother to be your assistant. He will be happy to see you. Your job will be to speak my words to him. He will be your prophet, your emissary, your ambassador. In other words, your press secretary. Y'all ever watch the president's press secretary? They speak for the president. The reporters will ask them, what did the president mean when he said this? What does the press secretary do? Well, what the president meant when he said that was da, 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 da. I spoke with the president yesterday. He's well aware, blah, 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 blah. Right? They speak for the president. Aaron is going to be Moses' press secretary. That's where this is going. All right, we're almost done. I want to get through these next couple of slides real quick. Moses went back home to Jethro, his father-in-law. Please let me return to my relatives in Egypt. Moses said, I don't even know if they're still alive. Go in peace, Jethro replied. Before Moses left Midian, the Lord said to him, return to Egypt, for all those who wanted to kill you have died. And so Moses took his wife and sons, put them on a donkey, headed back to the land of Egypt. In his hand, he carried the staff of God. And the Lord told Moses, when you arrive back in Egypt, go to Pharaoh, perform all the miracles I've empowered you to do, but I will harden his heart, so he will refuse to let the people go. And then you will tell him, this is what the Lord says. Israel is my firstborn son. I commanded you, let my son go, so he can worship me. But since you have refused, I will now kill your firstborn son. Nothing that is about to happen in Egypt will be a surprise to Moses. God has laid it all out ahead of time. Okay? Okay, so Moses returns to Jethro and tells him he needs to go. Right? Now, to me, Jethro's answer here seems to insinuate that he knows what's going on. But remember, Jethro is the high priest of Midian. Jethro is a priest. He's a direct descendant of Abraham. Okay? And we'll see in the next part of the story, we're going to see that circumcision is a familiar thing. So these people apparently are at least as close, if not closer to God than Moses is. Okay? So God reassures Moses the old regime in Egypt is dead. This ends the criminal prosecution for Moses, so Moses is no longer wanted by the law. Okay? But notice here the description of Moses' staff. Did you catch it? The staff of God. Right? In verse 2, God asked, what is that in your hand? To which Moses replied, it's a shepherd's staff. Right? When Moses had it, it was just a stick. Okay? But how is it described in verse 20? The staff of God. Because God now has given his blessing. He's put his hand on it. Okay? It's no longer a simple stick or a shepherd's staff. It is now the power of God. It is now the power of God. The same thing happens with us, right? This whole thing is a micro study of Moses. Moses was a simple shepherd. He was a stick. Hiding in the desert, keeping sheep. He didn't even have his own flock. He was right when he said, I'm a nobody. Right? And after God has touched him, and we'll see this as we go on, after God touches, we go from lowly to powerful. Moses went from a nobody to the leader of a powerful nation. He stood face to face with what was at that time a world power. One of the strongest nations on the face of the earth, Egypt. And Moses looked them in the eye. Right? Not because Moses was somebody, but because Moses was the staff of God. Moses was doing God's work. And that staff symbolized, see, Moses went from a simple stick to the club of righteousness for all intents and purposes. He went from simple to wise. Just like us, when God touches us, we go from incapable to, quote, more than conquerors. All right? All of this is our heritage. All right? So God tells Moses again what will happen, how Pharaoh will not agree, the firstborn son. Now this is important. This is the first time God has used the firstborn son imagery for Israel as a people. Okay? As a people. These people are my firstborn son. This is important because the firstborn children, this is an official title. Okay? Firstborn sons receive the inheritance. They get the family name. They're considered to be something special. Pharaoh's actions will be considered an attack on the firstborn. All right? Now you say, well, that was Israel. But in the New Testament, what are we told? We're adopted. We're grafted in. We're a part of the family. We're the firstborn by the blood of Jesus. Keep this imagery in your mind as we go through this next little story. Not tonight. Relax. Relax. But keep this imagery. Because of the blood shed, we are now a part of the family. Blood bought, part of the family. Keep that imagery in your mind as we study the next few verses next week. Okay? When it happens, God will react. When the attack on God's firstborn son occurs, right? God will react by judging the firstborn of Egypt. So tune in next week when we hear our hero say, cut off what? That ought to get everybody coming back. Right? I'll be saying, what?